Might have to shut the window. The crickets are pretty loud, and frogs and everything else.
I love that song.
I was going to say, I love that background. I crack my window at night, even if it's cold, just so I can hear that.
Yeah,
I know. I think it was last week when I was going down to Lake of the Ozarks when I drove through this low-lying area and I had the window kind of cracked and I heard that.
Yeah,
like it's springtime. I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting, that's for sure. It's nice to hear for a change. Back, let's see, where were we at? Get that out of here. Get this going back. Get everybody. We got everybody coming in. David,
yeah,
in
we
there.
got some people on here.
Hank, got Philip, Gary, and Tom. Let's see. David says 19 in PA. Ooh, you can keep that up there, David.
Tom says another snow day here in Chicago. Yeah, I think they got a bunch of snow out west, like in Denver, that area, or Colorado.
I heard like 91 inches.
Really?
In like just a day or two. It was something stupid.
I got a buddy that was in Colorado Springs, and he sent some pictures, and it was up there.
Yeah,
I hope we're done with most of that stuff, but you just never know.
Shawn, you think we're done with it, or think we're gonna get out of the rain?
We're done with the snow, I think.
Okay, you heard it right here.
Yeah. The bad part is I needed the snow about 2 months before it showed up. Is when I needed it for bow hunting and walking in the woods, and all I did was shovel.
Yeah. Well, at least it was easy and it was nice and fluffy snow. It wasn't real wet and packed down, so it wasn't too bad to shovel.
No, that was the easiest snow to move that but the problem was, like, you had to shovel a spot to move the next round of snow into. Yeah. It was like a assembly line just to get it. And it was so much.
Yeah, we were pushing to work. It was like pushing water. It just flowed out everywhere.
Yeah. You probably could have got like a leaf blower and done it.
We did that.
Did you do it?
Yeah, around the doors and stuff. It worked pretty good.
Cool. What's up, Av? I got my buddy Jason Abernathy's in here. Cody's in here. Jerry G, Hank Snow, Jay Bethel. What's up? So
where is the Pennsylvania gentleman from?
That's
you know what
David.
What town he's from or anything? Yeah. I'm born and bred from there and go back there. We have a hunting camp in the mountains back there, so I'm headed there in about a month.
Okay.
And just to let everybody know, I did not shrink. I just got a smaller chair.
Oh, you do? I'll lean in.
I feel so small.
So what's been going on, Shawn? Are you working on any projects and stuff?
We are finishing up fish attractor projects right now. So we've got we pretty much have all the trees put in, and now we have a few artificial things to put in. On Friday at Kincaid, I'll be putting in a couple of the Shelbyville cubes, we call them, about 5 foot tall, 4 foot square, with a bunch of ag drain pipe all around them. And then I have a Eagle Scout working on 30 of those for Rend Lake. So we'll get those in maybe as soon as he gets them done in April or May, we'll put those in Rend Lake.
So we should have our map by the end of May?
Well, the Rend Lake ones will take a little bit longer to update because they'll be at brand new spots. The Kincaid ones are going at the existing locations. I have some at 1 through 10, and we're going to put some at 11 and 12 on Friday.
So when you guys do that, do you just, like, I know you were talking about doing the PVC ones so they last longer and everything else. Now, do you guys go back to like your original brush piles, or do you try to pick different areas sometimes at those lakes?
It depends on the lake. We're limited as to how many Christmas trees we get in a year. And so Cedar, I'm not allowed to put any what they call organic matter in the lake. So I can't put any trees in at Cedar. So all the trees that the city of Carbondale collects in their recycling program, I haul and I put them in at Lake Murfreesboro. So we've got 15 spots at Lake Murfreesboro. That's all trees. And I just rotate each year wherever I stop the year before I start. So no matter when you go fish them, there's going to be trees on those locations that are at least a year or maybe 2 years old. All the stuff in Cedar is artificial. All the stuff in Kincaid is artificial. The Rend Lake is a mix of trees and artificial, but we move the tree locations don't ever change. We just refurbish them every 1 to 3 years, depending on how many trees we get. This year was a down year for trees. I don't know if it was where the shortage was, but we get trees turned in from people, and then the Corps will actually go to stores and pick up any trees that are not sold. Last year we put 750 trees in at Rend. This year we only had about 400. Dang. And we noticed that some other Carbondale had about the same amount because it's recycled trees that people turned in. But some of the other lakes around didn't get as many trees as they have in the past, just because I don't know if people didn't buy them, there was a shortage of them, or what seemed that, it was a weird year for everything, including Christmas trees.
I'll say my brother-in-law, he works a produce. He's retired and everything, so he works at this little produce stand that opened up here about 2 or 3 years ago, and they do Christmas trees, and every year they've got a ton of them left over.
Yeah,
but that's how I got the Christmas trees a couple of years ago for our ponds. But I know he's always got a couple truckloads full over there that they can't. They just kind of tell everybody whoever wants them come get them. But
David said he's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh. I grew up on the other side of the state.
And he also wants to know what's the reason no organic material?
The Cedar's a water supply lake, and somewhere in the hierarchy of the water management folks, the people that run that plant and are over it, they've just always they just would never allow us to put any kind of organic matter into that lake. It's just their choice, and that's why I had to ask 3 times to put the porcupine balls that we put in there. And I told them, I said, if you're not going to get them, they're all going to Kincaid, which is a water supply lake. And then finally I was able to at least get those in. But they've never allowed us to put any kind of organic matter in that lake because they just don't. A lot of these lakes, Kincaid, Cedar, Rend, they are all water supply lakes. And we have the privilege to fish them. But that could stop at any point in time if the governing body said no more fishing on that lake. It's only for water supply. That's like their main reason for existence. So, but that's the only one we've ever had. I don't want to say problems, they just don't want us putting trees in Cedar. And we, to be honest, I mean, I could haul those trees from Carbondale City Yard down there and put them in. But for the 160 trees and 30 spots in there, I'd have a hard time keeping material on each of those sites. And I try to set up my map so that once you have the coordinates, you have them. You don't have to keep getting a new map. And now at Rend, that's different because we add new spots with artificial stuff. So that map does get updated. But like the Murfreesboro map, if you have that map and you have the GPS coordinates in your depth finder, GPS, whatever, there's always going to be material on there as long as I'm working.
Gotcha.
Well, I can assure you that there's plenty of crappie fishermen that are putting plenty of brush piles in at Cedar Lake. Because every time I'm over there, I see new brush piles.
I talked to Gabe, or I'm sorry, we were talking about that here just a little while ago, and I said I get calls all the time about, hey, where'd you put those trees at in Cedar last week? I'm like, I'm not allowed to put trees in Cedar. Nobody is, man. Well, somebody had a boat load of trees, and we know it goes on. I ran into a gentleman putting porcupine balls in Kincaid the other day and had to tell him that's you just can't go out and do that. Now, what I will do with people, if they want to build something like the porcupine balls, these big cubes that we're building, they're welcome to build them, but I want to be there when they're putting them out, because we got to watch what we're putting in these water supply lakes. You also got to know that people are boating in them, water skiing, diving, swimming, and we just can't have people dumping a little bit of everything or whatever they feel like dumping in these water supply lakes.
So when you go out and plant fish habitat, what's the theory behind that? Are you planting some, like pre-spawn areas, some spawn areas, just different depths, or do you have a strategy for that?
The way I usually do mine is on public lakes. I usually like to put them in at least 10 or 15 foot of water. One, to avoid any kind of boat issues with boat motors or diving or swimming. I mean, at Cedar, and Murfreesboro, you're not supposed to be swimming, but somebody might dive off a boat and not know it. But one, I like them deeper for a couple of reasons. Typically, there is habitat in shallow water. when the fish move off in the summer or the winter, most of how our lakes were built, there's nothing down there. They were just completely cleared. So the fish are scattered. And so I like to put them in a little bit deeper water that will hold fish, where you might have a better chance at catching fish in times of year where they're scattered and not associated with shoreline structure. The other thing we have to watch, like at Kincaid, heat of summer, there's probably not much oxygen below 15 or 20 feet in most spots. So to put some down at 25 or 30 feet, they're not going to get used for the majority of the year. So I like to keep them within what we call the thermocline, or above the thermocline, where there's going to be fish year round, but deep enough that boats aren't going to hit it. People aren't going to water ski and get hurt. And also I always say, sometimes dealing with the public, there's a little bit of a knucklehead factor. And in clear lakes, if people can see them and they're easily moved, they're going to take them, move them somewhere. And then the GPS coordinates that I've given you aren't any good because there's nothing there.
Yeah. Just real quick, I know I've seen it a couple times already. What is it on the the IDNR website that they can get the maps for those?
If you go to ifishillinois.org, you can find information on all the lakes and fish attractor maps. If you'd rather just get them from me, you can just send me a request via email, and I can send them that way. It's the same ones that are on the iFish, but I'll be glad to. I sent out probably 10 or 15 today because I was gone last week. But if you happen to have that email address, or I can give it today if they want to email me a request, I send it out.
Yep, I've got it all down in the description, right under your name and your phone number down there too. So.
And what I typically do, like this Johnny B asked about Lake Murfreesboro. If he asks for the Lake Murfreesboro a fish attractor map, I just send him Cedar, Kincaid, Lake Murfreesboro, the link to get the Rend Lake one. And I also explain the type of material that's in the different lakes at the different sites.
Gotcha.
See, Ron's in here from Gunnersville. He's down there fishing the Angler's Choice Championship. So glad to see Ron on here.
Yep. And Wade had a question about the lake population on Cedar.
Well, part of the COVID restriction and why you guys weren't allowed on the lake, I wasn't allowed on the lake either. So we didn't do our spring surveys on Cedar and Kincaid last year. The year before that, 2019, Cedar and Kincaid were just off the charts for bass, and we got our best crappie survey at both those lakes in 2019. We'll be doing both of those lakes in the spring, probably mid-April, early May. But I mean, Cedar's been good for a long time, and I don't foresee it having changed in a year. One thing I always encourage people at Cedar is, if you're going to dirty a knife, keep your 5 small bass under 14 inches. There's too many of them. They stack up. And once they get to that 14-inch to 18-inch protected slot, they just take off. They grow fast. They're fat, but we need you to keep your little ones. We call it Smokey the Bear syndrome. We beat catch and release fishing into people so hard that when we want them to keep some, it's sacrilegious, to keep a bass. But there's a couple lakes, Devil's Kitchen, Cedar, where we actually need people to keep those little bass to make the bass fishing better.
Especially Devil's Kitchen. Devil's Kitchen is just chock full of like 11 and 12-inch fish. And some big ones. Yep.
Jay's got a good question on there. He was talking about Kincaid. And I know we kind of touched base on this last time. I don't think Jay was in here then, though. About the smallmouth being introduced over on Kincaid. And I know you said you put them in there. Was it back in the 80s?
No, it was in the 2000s.
2000.
It is the single biggest disappointment of my whole career because I wanted them so bad to do well there. We have ponds that we can raise fish in over there that the water plant has put in for us and helps us drain. In addition to that, they had put about 6 or 7 miles of that shoreline riprap over there to stop erosion. And I thought, well, we can raise these smallmouth to 4 to 6 inches. There's 7 miles of rock in addition to all the natural rock that's there. And I thought maybe those fish would relate to that rock. And it's just everywhere they've been tried where you have a healthy largemouth population, they just don't do well. Now, if we stocked about 60,000 fish over there, I'd say over 5 to 6, 7 years. and we would see them occasionally. There was some caught last year that were 18, 19 inches, but they weren't showing up in surveys. Initially, there was a lot of people catching 10, 12, 14-inch fish, and I just thought, well, it's going to take them a little bit longer to get big, because over there we see the same thing. Anything under 14 inches, those bass are small and skinny. Once they get over that 14-inch, I think it's their mouth size is big enough that there's a whole new prey base available to them, and they just take off. And if you think a smallmouth, it's called a smallmouth because it has a smaller mouth, and it would take them a little bit longer. But they just basically disappeared. I wouldn't be surprised if people catch a few this year, but no one was catching them. We weren't seeing them. And it just didn't make any sense to keep dumping them in there, as much as I hated that it didn't work.
Yeah, that's I'm with you. That's frustrating. That would have been really, really nice to have a smallmouth fishery here locally.
Yeah. You said you were at Kincaid this weekend?
No, I'm gone there Friday to dump some fish attractors in.
Yeah, I was over there, was it last Sunday or no, Sunday before last, and boy, I tell you, it was muddy. Holy cow!
Yeah.
Well,
I've
never seen it that muddy that far down.
If you follow that Johnson Creek area up, the further up, the muddier it's going to get. They've done an awful lot of stuff up there. When we originally looked at the erosion and the muddiness in that lake, the majority of the erosion was shoreline erosion, and that's why they put all that riprap in. When you start moving up into the watershed and try to fix these little ditches and gullies, especially in a place like, it's not like you can drive up to them at Kincaid. I mean, it's the middle of the Shawnee National Forest. It's very expensive, very labor intensive, and it's just the soils are prone to washing out up in that part of the watershed. One thing they've done is, if you go up to the Johnson Creek area, launch at the ramp, you'll see a new, what we call kind of a dry dam up there. That's going to try to slow some of that erosion down that's coming in from Johnson Creek. So that will trap some of the sediment and maybe allow us to keep that boat ramp open longer. And then as that stuff builds up, it's made where they can go out and dig that sediment out on the upstream part of that, so that it'll trap more sediment in the future. But that's one thing we did do to try to slow that down. We've talked about some other things in that northwest portion of Kincaid, like put a big dry dam up there. I used to sample up north of the 151 bridge, and now it's trees. I mean, I used to drive a boat on it and sample it not 20 years ago. But the problem is, when they redid that 151 highway, the Conservancy District folks asked them to make it taller, and they did not do that. It would have, I guess it was, I don't know if it was a money thing. They just didn't want to do it. So you can't back up water, up on that highway. And there was discussions at one point of putting a big dry dam up there somewhere and just sacrifice part of the lake to keep the rest of the lake, keep that silt up in that area. But it's just logistically and cost wise, it's just not going to work.
Right.
I know that riprap project that you guys did over at Cedar Lake a couple years ago has really made a great improvement for the sediment and stuff that's washing into the lake. I mean, it takes a whole lot more rain to muddy Cedar up than it did prior to the riprapping project. So it's done what it's supposed to. Not only is it serve the soil erosion purpose, or lessen the soil erosion purpose, it's filtered. The rock seems like it filters some out, and then the grass filters a lot more out too. And the water just stays a lot cleaner over there the last couple of years than it had in the past.
Yeah, one of the ways, or how that works, is when you have a big 8-10 foot bare bank like that, it erodes at the bottom and it just keeps sloughing off, and then you have a bunch of silt that nothing can grow in. But by putting that in-lake abutment with that rock, it stabilizes the soil, and that's why you see in front of all those the Kincaid riprap weeds growing, and that helps stabilize the soil even more. And then that little bit of rock that's out of the water cuts the energy of the wind and wave action, and it keeps that from really sloughing off. And then as it does slough off, that's going to act like the toe of the dam. So it'll be a gradual slope that'll vegetate, and that'll keep the erosion from coming in along the shoreline too. But it's really worked in Kincaid and in Cedar. And what it does is not only does it slow that erosion down, it increases the water clarity because you have a less erosion, which is like clay particles and mud. Then when you get the weeds growing, the weeds take up the nutrients, and that cuts down on the phytoplankton, which is the green microscopic plants, and makes the lake even clearer. When it's clear, sunlight gets even deeper, and rooted aquatic veg can grow even deeper and make the lake clear. It's almost like a snowball type effect.
Yeah. So what you're saying is we just need to kick all the pleasure boaters off for a year and see what grows?
Well, it's growing now. I mean, they keep track of. We look at. We have a thing called a Secchi disc. It looks like a pie plate with 4 quadrants. 2 are black and 2 are white. And you lower that into the lake, and that's how we measure water clarity. And I think it's been they've gotten record water clarity in the last few years at Kincaid because of all the work that's been done there, and because of the success of that. Cedar saw that and said, "Well, there's no point reinventing a wheel. We know what works." And that was kind of a first of its kind type thing, that in lake management like that. That was I believe that he was an engineer with DOT that came up with like the boat and the conveyor belt and how you put that riprap on. A lot of riprap, you drive a big dump truck and dump it along the side of the lake. And this was put out by boat in depths to help, it was a lot. You didn't have to cut trees down, build roads to get there. And it really has been a really fantastic project for both lakes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I've been over there a couple times several years ago at Cedar when they were doing that. There was like a crane or whatever that was scooping up that rock and swinging it out onto like a barge type boat. And then once he got a load, the guy would take off and dump it. And they were just working like that all day long.
I've seen
It's a pretty good system.
Yeah.
There's they'll dump it into a barge. It has a hopper with a front end loader on it. And then there's almost like a conveyor belt, like at the grocery store, that sticks off the end. And when I saw them first doing it at Kincaid, then they had a little John boat pushing that barge sideways, and they're dumping it on like geomat. It's some mat that's like road mat type stuff that's put down on that silt, and then the rocks piled up on top of that. But it's pretty slick, and we were blessed with there's a quarry not far from Kincaid, and that's the big cost, is all that, hauling that rock is expensive. Mm-hmm. But with a quarry right up the road at Kincaid, and obviously not too far, there's one in Anna, and we were lucky that it didn't cost that much in terms of transportation, all that riprap.
Yeah. Speaking of talking about paying for that stuff and everything, Ron put on there a pretty good question about how the state's financing is going right now with the fish management and everything.
The way our outfit works is when people buy a fishing license, we get that money, and then when you're buying fishing gear, a certain percentage of gas is considered boat gas. That's a federal excise tax that's given back to the states, and it's based on there's a formula of like water acreage and number of licenses sold, and that's where all of our salary money comes and our management money comes for the lakes. So what hurts us is gas for trucks, that type of thing. We haven't had the problem yet with that. Now, years ago, when there was some lean times, we were on gas rations and all that type of thing, but we haven't had any of those problems for probably 8 or 10 years. Now, we don't have unlimited funding to where like I can go build a bunch of these fish attractors. A lot of that's donated. The Corps we're working on an Eagle Scout project at Rend where we're building 30 of those cubes. The Corps bought that. The ones I've been putting at Kincaid, Kincaid Conservancy District set up what's called a fish management fund, and anglers, organizations donate money to it, and 100% of the funding goes to buy that material for us to do work at Kincaid. There's no administrative cost to it. I only spend it on stuff that's going right into the lake, and what we've been spending it on is those fish attractors.
Gotcha.
Hey, Johnny B wants to know, are there still trout being stocked in Devil's Kitchen?
As of now, there is.
Okay.
Have you seen that one? I didn't see
Yeah,
that.
it was up there at the top. It slid down. Now, so is that just? I guess they can survive. It's deep enough and cool enough that they can live year round. That's
the only lake around that has sufficient oxygen and cold enough water in the summertime to allow those trout to make it. There's something I can't quite explain it, if it's wind, wave action, or why that lake is different than, because I mean, we've got depths at Super Lake up at Pyramid that's 90, 100 feet, but it also stratifies just kind of like Cedar and Kincaid and all these other lakes where you just don't have oxygen low enough for them. But that's always been a unique fishery there for the trout at Devil's Kitchen.
Oh, damn.
Is that, you mentioned how Kincaid is clearing up, and you were talking about the thermocline earlier. So is that going to make that thermocline setup deeper as the water gets clearer? How does that relationship work with the thermocline?
It's typically where sunlight's going to get to, and some of that depends on fertility. Now, if you have a lot of submerged plants that will help clear the water, allowing for deeper sunlight penetration, it could result in a little bit deeper thermocline at Kincaid, but we have not seen that yet. Another thing that goes on at Kincaid, it's not real big with respect to like width. If you look at it on a map, I mean, it's skinny arms. It's also a real steep watershed. So I know it can whitecap out there when the wind's whipping, but nothing like you'll see on like Baldwin Lake, Wren Lake, some big open Carlisle, something that gets all that wave action and wind action. It's not quite as pronounced, and that could be part of the reason we have that shallow oxygen depth in the summertime there.
Gotcha. Wade was wanting to know, what is the actual name of that grass at Cedar?
What's the primary grass?
I've seen a lot of what's called milfoil, which almost looks like a bird's feather, all the little leaves. And then there's also another one that's got also a whorl that's called coontail, because it looks like a raccoon's tail. That would be the main two, especially if they're in any depth at all. It's either going to be coontail and or milfoil.
Yeah, and just to follow up with that, Stephanie was asking about the grass at Cedar. Does it die off completely, or start over, or does it just?
It typically will die off in the wintertime and then grows back. And we see that in the farm ponds too. Same thing.
Gotcha.
Now there is a plant known as curly leaf that will grow, and the bad part with it, we've had problems with it down at Mermet. It survives in the cold all spring, and then it dies in the summer. And when a big patch of that dies in the summer, it causes oxygen problems from the plants decomposing. And we've had fish kills down at Mermet because of that, but they've been treating that with some chemicals trying to get rid of it.
So you would say the majority of the grass that you're seeing on Cedar is going to be the milfoil?
If it's if it's submerged, it's either going to be coontail or milfoil. And there's also an invasive called Eurasian milfoil that will grow fairly a lot deeper too. We see that a lot up at the strip cuts up at Pyramid.
Okay.
Gotcha. And Stephanie's got a question there. She goes, when you catch a bass on a small lure and it has a whole shad in there, it's a pretty good size in its mouth. Does it take a certain amount of time for them to get the nutrition from the shad, or is that just a bass being greedy?
They are opportunistic feeders. I've kept small bass in a aquarium and threw 8 or 10 minnows in, and they'll have 3 in their mouth, and they're chasing other ones, even though they have no room left in their mouth. So if they have a free meal and room, they're going to get after.
Gotcha.
I heard a story. I can't remember. I heard it the other day, but one guy was fishing a jig, one guy was fishing a worm, and the first guy got a bite, set the hook, and then the second guy got a bite, set the hook, and that bass had eaten both of their baits. And what he thinks happened was the first bait, the guy was just not in tune with his bait, and maybe the bass picked it up and swam off with it a little bit and then sucked the second guy's bait in, and they were both fighting the same fish. And he said he wouldn't believe it if he wasn't in the boat and saw it happen. And I've had another buddy of mine told me a similar story that happened on Lake of the Ozarks, where they were both fishing like a Zoom Mag 2 plastic worm in the same color, and they both caught the same fish at the same time. It had a hook, one hook on this side of the mouth and one hook on that side of the mouth. So like you just said, when you're catching that bass and he's got a shad in his throat, the fork tail sticking out, and he or she still ate your lure, they're just down there feeding for a short feeding window, and they're getting whatever they can get their mouth around. So
see. Jay had a good one about Reynolds County.
Did they try trout at Reynolds County 15 to 20 years ago?
I don't even know where Reynolds County is, so I can't answer that. I've been in Southern Illinois my whole career. I'm not sure where Reynolds. Now they've had trout, I think, at Randolph County Conservation Area, if that's what he meant. But I'll have to say I don't even know where Reynolds County is.
They stock Randolph every year, if I'm right about that.
Yeah, it's just like Legion Lake over here.
Yeah.
And a lot of that program is it's not completely covered, but it's one of the reasons that they. I think I bought my trout stamp the other day when I bought my. It was $6.50 or something. That helps support that program. It doesn't completely cover it, but because that's not something we can really raise at our hatchery. They're mainly bought at out of state hatcheries and stocked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, other than Devil's Kitchen, it's considered what we call put and take, meaning they're not going to spawn. We don't expect them to live year round. They're put in there for anglers to take and eat. That's what people like to do for trout in Southern Illinois. It's been our experience.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question. Is they put them in there just for people to catch and eat, or is there?
They won't survive.
I was going to say, is it beneficial to the lakes at all?
It's not. If you stock them, when people ask me about stocking them in private ponds, I always tell them they're going to die out in the summer. So what I would do is, if your heart's set on it and you want to fish for them, if you're going to stock them in a private pond, stock them in the fall, and that gives you all fall, winter, and spring to fish for those trout. But they're going to die in the summertime. Other than Devil's Kitchen, that has, like we had mentioned, oxygen in cold water in the summer, they're not going to live. One side effect of that is it will grow trophy bass. The biggest bass I've seen in my career down here have been 10-pound fish that have come out of Devil's Kitchen, and there's a little lake at Ferncliff that gets stocked with with trout. And those trout are long, slender, spineless, and not overly bright because they've been fed little pellets and lived in a concrete raceway.
Yeah.
And those a lot of those bigger bass that will sometimes shock at Devil's Kitchen, you might see a rainbow trout tail sticking out of its gut instead of a shad.
Is that Fern? You called it Ferncliff?
It's at Ferncliff State Park. It's like maybe 20 acres.
It's a walk. It doesn't have a boat ramp or anything, does it?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And I have my wife's also a fish biologist. She was helping another biologist down there, and I have a picture of her holding I think it's a 10 and a 7.5 out of that lake. And the 7.5 looks like, a 3-pound bass. And it's just crazy the difference between a 7.5-pound bass is a nice fish.
Sure.
But next to a 10-pound fish, it's amazing the difference in them. And we don't see them real often, but that's where we do see them. The only one that kind of messed up that argument is someone caught an 11-something in crab, I think a year or two ago in a tournament, probably 2 years ago or 3 in a tournament. And that was an oddball. Like I said, we'll see 7 and 8s in crab, but to a legit 10-pound bass that we weigh and it's 10 pounds, we typically will see in those trout lakes.
Scroll back up just a little bit. Somebody was talking about Bass Guy 1960 says to check out the Lake Shelbyville Fish Habitat Alliance Facebook page. We've been putting artificial structures in Lake Shelbyville since the fall of 2016 with over 1,000 structures deployed to date. So, man, we really appreciate that, Bass Guy. That's awesome.
I will be over there on Saturday with a habitat barge, putting more of them out, helping the biologist over there. That Habitat Alliance is a group of private individuals that was able to get some grants. And that's where that material's coming. That's not, the Corps' not buying that. DNR is not buying that. Those gentlemen, I shouldn't say gentlemen, those folks get together on a weekend. They can build like 70 to 100 of those things. I mean, they've got a system going down there. They have banquets where they're raising money. It's pretty impressive what they've been able to do over there. But a lot of that is a private group that's coming up with that money.
Well, that kind of answers some of this question here. Aaron was wanting to know, us as anglers, what can we do if anything other than the obvious to help with the health of all of our fisheries in Southern Illinois?
The main thing is just follow the regs is one great helpful thing. I tell people, if you want to donate to that fish management fund at Kincaid, I promise that's strictly gone for material to build fish attractors to put in the lake. The bad part is it's only for Kincaid. So if you fish at Rend, you're not going to get a benefit out of that. We just don't have like a system set up where people can donate money for us to buy things. Now, if somebody wants to buy the materials, we can do that for sure. But, that's just harder to do, to get a group organized like they were able to do it over at Shelbyville. But they've got a machine going over there. I'm very envious of what they've been able to do over there.
What's how's the health of Wren Lake as a fishery now?
It's really good. That lake is very dependent on water levels. If we get good spring rains that get the lake up and it stays up for a long time, you get a tremendous spawn. If we don't get the rains, or the water goes up and then goes down very quickly because we get one rain event and then it just drops, there's no habitat there along the edge unless it's above 405, which is standard full pool. But once you get up over 405, you get into the button bush and all that brush that's around the lake. There's a lot better spawning habitat. The soils are more stable. The fish can build beds in it and that type of thing. But the problem is, if the water doesn't rise in the spring, which normally it does, the fish don't have a good spawning habitat there because of the substrate. And it's an old lake with a lot of mud, and there's just not much we can do. It'd be nice to put millions of dollars of gravel over there, but that's just not going to happen funding wise. But if the water's up and stays in that brush for an extended period and allows those fish to spawn in there, the eggs to hatch and the little ones to hide out in there, we get a really good year class, especially a bass. We've got a couple good year classes. And last year we were able to put about 80,000, like 4 to 8 inch bass in there. Our survey went from about, I think, 60 an hour, 60 bass collected per hour in previous year to 130 an hour last year. So there's a couple of really good year classes coming through there. Now they're not big fish. They're all, they'll be 10 to 16 inches this year, but 14 is the length limit over there in terms of people fishing tournaments. But that's one lake where it would be best to not even keep a bass ever unless it's a wall hanger.
Mm-hmm.
And the crappie looked really good too. I don't do a lot of fishing, but my first kayak trip is going to be over to Wren Lake after what I saw in that fall survey, just for numbers of fish and the crappie are beautiful. I mean, the crappie have been good for a long time, but the bass really fluctuate. We stock it every year, but we just can't raise enough to keep it up. We got to have a good natural spawn, and that's up to Mother Nature. But we've got some good year classes moving through over there, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
Now, I'll tell you one thing I do hear a lot about Rend is there's a lot of people claiming they can't catch their small crappie over there, meaning under 10 inches. And I can't argue that they're not catching them, but we did our annual crappie survey late October. We collected 1,400 crappie, and 70% of those were under 10 inches. So I don't know why they don't bite, but I mean, that's what we saw them. And I can't explain why it's so easy to catch the big ones there. And I know it's frustrating that you got to turn those bigger ones loose, but that lake gets so much pressure that if we didn't limit it like that, it wouldn't last very long.
So how's that regulation on the crappie over there?
It's, you can keep 25 fish a day. Only 10 of them can be over 10 inches.
Oh.
So you can keep 25 fish under 10 inches or any combination of 25 fish, as long as not more than 10 of them are over 10 inches. And one of the ways we know that there's a tremendous amount of harvest there is all the fish that we collect over 10 inches are fat and healthy, meaning they're growing, they got plenty of food. We don't see very many 12-inch fish there, and we rarely see a 15-inch fish there, crappie. And that's because they're just getting harvested so quickly once they get to that 10-inch length limit.
That's neat. It's interesting to see that those limits are having an effect, on the lake. You can actually see it just from year to year how it's working out.
Yeah, usually you always hear about crappie and how they populate so fast. You wouldn't think you'd ever see I think we even touched base on that last time we were on. with Rend Lake, you said you could catch all the crappie you'd ever want out of there. You never heard that population over there because they were so
Well,
big.
at Crab Orchard, it's stunted, and we need to harvest as many as we can. That's why there's no limits at all at Crab Orchard. Now at Rend, if we just turn people loose, they could affect that population. But the way that population is set up is we got to limit the number of bigger fish so they're not all gone in a year or two, but still allow people to thin out the smaller fish so that they don't stunt like they have at some other lakes. Because once they stunt, like at crab's been stunted for years, it hasn't had any limit on it whatsoever. But people don't want to keep, 80 crappie that are 8 inches long and you can hold them up and see their bones when you look at the sun.
Yeah.
And that's the dilemma. They're not going to get bigger because there's too many of them. Deer you can let walk and they're probably going to get bigger, but stunted crappie aren't going to get bigger.
Right.
I know the crappie population at Cedar is very healthy. There's a lot of nice 13, 14, 15-inch crappie over there. I caught one probably 17 plus inches. I was punching grass mats for bass with a 1 ounce tungsten weight, 50-pound braid, and I punched in through this mat and I got a bite and set the hook, and it was like a 17-inch crappie. So there's some big ones in there.
Sounds like you've been fishing in my pond.
When we sampled that last in 2019, like I said, we weren't able to sample a couple of our lakes last spring. The crappie and Cedar never looked better in turn. And it was funny because we launched the boat. Two different groups of people were coming off the water when we were launching our boat. So they didn't catch a thing all day. So I'm always scared, I'm like, well, wonder what happened to all the fish. Well, within 10 minutes, we had 100-pound crappie in our live well. And I'm like, well, they just weren't using the right bait or something. I don't know what they were doing wrong, or maybe the fish weren't biting that day. But it didn't take long for us to be like, man, this is loaded. And then we went to Kincaid the next, about 2 or 3 days later, it was the same thing. We just happened to time it right in terms of the fish being in staging and or on their nests. And it was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Alex had a pretty good question here. I'm kind of interested.
That's a real good question,
Hear your
Alex.
thoughts on this. He said, going off your Devil's Kitchen bass size topic, what do you think a weight and size cap would be at like Lake Cedar or Kincaid?
I'm not sure if I understand what do
you think is there a weight cap for the size of a bass at Cedar Lake? What do you think the biggest fish that lake could possibly grow, Cedar and Kincaid?
We've seen 7 and 8 sampling there, which are pretty good. The problem is there's so many big fish, and although they're healthy, they're not going to get monstrous because there's only, so many shad out there. Now, Cedar's loaded with 4s and 5s, and they're all fat and healthy. But, it takes an awful lot of food to get an 8-pound, 10-pound bass. And the only way you do that is have very, very limited fish there. And what will happen at Devil's Kitchen is some of those bass will turn cannibal. And that's why they get big enough to start eating shad, other bass, and those trout. But it's very rare. And you just don't. That's why I said the only place to really catch like a 10-pound fish is at Devil's Kitchen. But you could fish there for 10 years and not even, never catch one. But because there's just not very many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say you see a lot of tournaments at Kincaid, and I'm just going off Kincaid. I know Gabe fishes Cedar a whole lot more than I do. I've only fished it once or twice. But Kincaid, even with tournaments, you don't see a whole lot over 6 over there.
Mm.
And that could be, like I said, because a couple of factors. When there's a lot of weeds, that's a lot of places for the smaller fish to hide. And although the bigger fish, all the fish we see at Kincaid that are above 16 inches, they're all have great body condition. But at some point, chasing stuff around, they got to get more calories from what they're catching than the energy they're expending to catch it. And it could be, something like that. But it's not like the 6s and 7s I've seen over there are skinny.
I think they've got some of the healthiest looking bass around.
Yeah. The other thing you got to remember too is Cedar, although there's a lot of people that bass fish, there's tournaments every weekend at Cedar. With that 9.9 limit, it's more of a John boat lake. And if you think of your stereotypical bass angler, they're going to have a bigger motor and not really be able to fish a lake that big with just with a trolling motor. So it doesn't quite get the pressure that Kincaid's going to get, or that some of these other lakes with unlimited motor sizes are going to get.
Yeah, you see, and like Greg said, I'm at Cedar quite a bit, although I haven't been there in like 2 months, since I got iced off. But in those tournaments over there, if you catch, there's not a lot of six pounders brought in. Usually the big bass is going to be like a mid fives. Now every once in a while, say every couple tournaments, somebody will bring in a low 6. I saw a 703 weighed in last year, but that 6 pound class fish, the numbers really drop off. I mean, you see a lot of 3.5 to maybe 5 pounders. And then that 5 to 6 is quite a bit more difficult, but anything, 6 and above, it's, you just don't see the numbers of those, which makes sense.
And that gets back to the, like I said, the overabundance of those smaller bass under 14 inches. They're just hammering the prey base, and those bigger bass need bigger shad and bigger fish to eat. And now they have enough to eat because they have good body condition, but to get them up to trophy size, by limiting some of those smaller fish, removing them, lowering the density of them, you could in fact have more bigger trophy fish there, but it's just hard to get people to keep those fish.
Right. And that grass spreads them out too. The more grass, the more places they got to hide. They just have so many places to live.
Yeah. And
the other thing there too is the resources are so limited with respect to access that there's only so many places to park. You go there in the spring down, I've driven through the ramp down there at Pomona, and I don't know how half those people get out if they come off the lake and they want to leave because they're parked. It looks to me, I don't know how they back their trailer out and get out of the place, But even full though, that's nothing like one parking lot you'd see at Rend or at the Mount Joy ramp at Kincaid. So even if everybody was gung-ho to keep their 5 little ones, it's still tough to get in there. And that's a 1,700 acre lake. So you got to take an awful lot of little fish out, and there's a whole nother year class coming behind them. So it's not just go keep your 5 and you've fixed it. But it's a wonderful problem to have too many bass. Normally in a public lake, we have the opposite problem. So, and the other thing that we're blessed with down here, there's so many places to go. I mean, it's not like some of the urban areas up in the Chicago area where they have 2,000 acre lake and 1 million people want to go there and fish and hike. We could just have not unlimited, but we have an awful lot of choices within an hour of our homes where we want to go fish.
Yeah. Richard put on there, he want to know how many baits you can have on an A-rig at Kincaid, which I know there's a 5 hook limit on theirs, right?
No, the only place we have limits are on when we have what's called 2 pole and line fishing only. On a single rig, that might be the case. That's something I'd rather have law enforcement answer, because they'd be the ones to write you the ticket. It wouldn't be, well, Shawn said on the Tin Horse Monty we were allowed to have unlimited. But I think with I don't know if that's what they're calling the spider array or what it is, but I think there's something on that iFish page that talks about that, what lakes it's legal at and how many you can have. But if he wants to email me his contact information, I can ask a law enforcement officer and I want to make sure to get him the right answer so he doesn't have a bad day on the lake.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's 5 lakes over there that you can fish the full A rig, which is a 5-arm rig. One I know is Lake of Egypt. The other one is Kincaid, and there's 3 other ones. And I'm not going to speculate, just like you just said, but those 2, I know you can fish the 5-arm rig over there because I did the research and looked it up. I want to say Wren is another one, but I'm not 100% sure. Stephanie's got a good question about her. Yeah. She says the water on Carbondale end of Cedar is quite a bit more clear than the Pomona end. Does Carbondale filter it due to it being their water supply, or is there other filtering going on?
It probably doesn't have anything to do with the filtering. It probably depends on where the creeks come in and where that clay falls out of suspension. Just like you would have at Kincaid after a big rain, the Johnson Creek end is going to look like chocolate milk. And as you get further and further down to the main lake towards the dam, it's going to clear up considerably for you.
Yeah,
So
Stephanie, at Cedar in the Pomona Inn, you've got the creek that you drive past on the way to the boat ramp. That will bring in a lot of sediment. Then you've got, if you go out from the boat ramp and you hang a right, you got Little Cedar Lake back there. There'll be overflow that comes out of Little Cedar across that rock spillway. So that's another access point for that dirtier water. And then if you go down the main lake and go back in what we call the East Arm, that's Clay Lick Creek down there. And that brings in a lot of dirtier water. So you've got all three of those little watersheds bringing in dirtier water to that section of the lake. And on the north end, the Carbondale ramp, you have that one creek where the golf course is back in that area. So south end, you've got three creeks bringing that dirtier water in. And up north, you've got one. So that's why it's always clearer up there, no matter, what time of the year.
On a related story to Stephanie's question, when we sample lakes, we're typically sampling them at the same time of year and the same locations so that we can compare the populations that we collect from year to year to year. Both of our standardized runs are at that Pomona end at the two different arms. And when they were put in by my predecessor, 30 years ago, the theory was we wanted to sample that murkier water because when you're standing on a boat with a generator running and it's crystal clear, those fish are going to swim away from you. We use electricity to stun the fish and collect them. That only works in a fairly small area in front of the boat and about 6 and 8 foot deep. So all of our standardized runs that we do each year are at the Pomona arm or that the other arm on that side. We don't really sample up by the Carbondale Lake because of that clear water. Just the equipment they had back in the day that we had to take advantage of that murkier water in the spring after a rain, just so we could collect fish and they wouldn't swim away from us before we could stun them.
Does stained water transmit the electrodes better than clear water? Is there anything to that?
No, but like I said, when we're standing up with nets in our hand and there's a generator running and they can see you, if there's structure there, they'll sometimes stay and you can shock that structure and they'll come out because they think they're protected. But if there's not a lot of down trees and stuff like that, they're just swimming away from you.
Okay.
And so with a little bit murkier water, they feel a little bit safer in terms of staying there so that when we get there with our equipment, we'll actually get to see them float to the top.
Okay. Connor Lacey has a really good question. Are there spotted bass in any lakes in southern Illinois?
When we sample Rend, we typically will get 800 or 1,000 in our survey. Maybe 1 or 2 are spots. Other than that, you'll see them in the creeks. But in terms of in the lakes, we don't see them in the lakes other than at Rend, and that's because of the Big Muddy River, the effect of the Big Muddy River having some spots in it. So we see them in the rivers, but we rarely see them in the inland lakes.
Well, a while ago you were talking about wanting to do smallmouth in there. I mean, is there any reason they don't have spotted bass in there?
They get out competed just the same as the smallmouth do. And actually what you'll find, and I don't, being from Missouri, it's funny over there in some of the small creeks I fish for smallmouth, they want you to keep all the spotted bass you can catch because they're displacing the smallmouth in a lot of those. They almost view them as like an invasive over there in some of the creeks.
They're extremely aggressive too.
Yeah.
Alex P wants to know, he said they used to stock walleye in Kincaid. Are there any plans to do this again?
We've been stocking them in Kincaid since the mid 80s. We stock them every year. They're fingerling fish. We don't see a lot of them because they don't reproduce. There's a lot of predators in Kincaid. They're stocked as like 1 to 2 inch fingerlings. When we're wanting to see walleye, we will catch some in our nets down by the spillway. If I do a walleye specific survey, I'll set nets at night down in that spillway area and we'll catch them, especially if the spillway's running right in front of the spillway fence. I know for years the big fishery was down in the pool below the spillway, but the spillway barrier put an end to those walleye getting out. So we see a lot of big walleye not a lot. we see big trophy walleye there. It's just a numbers game. I know that there's people that have tried to figure them out. Some of the guides have tried to figure them out. And the phone call I always get is, we fish for them in Canada and we use this, and this, and it doesn't work here. And I just think it's a numbers game. But when I tell people, if you want to catch one, I would fish at night in the spring down in front of the dam in the spillway area.
What's the biggest walleye that you know of that's been caught out of Kincaid?
The biggest one I've seen was, I think, 9 pounds.
Okay.
We'll actually tie when we do our muskie survey, which will be in about 2 weeks. We'll use what's called a trap net that sits in the lake all night. We'll actually tie one end of it to that spillway barrier and stretch it out back towards the lake, and we get muskies and walleye in that. The other place we've seen them a lot is there's a house down there by the Kincaid spillway up on a hill. That cove has them, and then there's a big hump down coming off of Kincaid. Some people have called it the boxcar, or it's near what they call the boxcar. There's a big hump that comes way out in the lake, and we catch them on top of that hump at nighttime when we used to set nets down there for them.
Okay.
But there's also walleye at a couple lakes up at Pyramid State Park, and they're all stocked, and they're stocked annually. But again, it's a numbers game. You're just not going to have walleye like you do up in the northern states or in Canada.
And last time you were on here, we touched on Pyramid State Park and how you're not able to do any kind of electro surveying because of the water's not conducive to that.
Most of the lakes up there have real high water conductivity. And if the water has real high conductivity, you can't stun the fish. It's the same reason why you can't shock in salt water. The dissolved ions are greater in the water than they are in the fish, and the ions take up all the electrical charges, the voltage, the wattage, and it doesn't stun the fish. So there's a few of them we can shock up there, but the majority of them that we can't. Now there's a new biologist that's over that area. I was doing like 3 different districts for a long time. He's going to have a little more time to try to shock some of the lakes and just see what kind of success he has. And he's also going to be able to do some netting up there and that type of thing. So we might get to learn a little bit more about up there, but it's frustrating because that's how we get most of our data on bass is through shocking. They don't get caught in the nets.
Dennis had a pretty good question. I've always kind of wondered this, even on Kincaid. I've seen a few, but have the otters had any effect on any of these lakes? I know there's a lot of eaters over there, but
we haven't seen it on big public lakes. But I know that they've done some damage at our hatchery, and I know they can do some damage on a private pond.
Yeah,
because they can actively swim down an adult fish and eat it. They're not eating your little fish you want them to eat. They're eating the fish that you want to catch and eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would discourage them. They're cute, they're fun to have, and they're a novelty, but I wouldn't want them in my fish pond at the house.
Right.
And what we've seen is they kind of run a circuit. You might see one and then not see it again for a week, and then not see it again for a week. They kind of run a circuit, it seems like, depending on how much water and how much food's around. But we've seen
they're pond hopping in an area, I guess.
Yeah. And then if at Kincaid they don't need to do that, at Cedar they don't need to do that. But we've seen more and more of them in recent years, and I guess there's quite a few white ones as well. There's some kind of albinoism, and it's not that rare, I guess, to see a white one.
Huh. Wow.
I've never seen one of them.
No.
Jay had a pretty good question here. We've had on the show, I don't know, maybe once or twice, I guess, about forward-facing sonar. But what effect do you think it'll have on the fishery?
Are you familiar with forward-facing sonar?
Is that the live?
The live scope?
Yeah. The live scope.
Yeah.
We've told some of the newer hires that are going to be here after we're gone, it's going to change what you're doing because the fish can't hide anymore. People can go out and almost, it seems like, size select fish that are out there.
Yep.
With the old school stuff and the way the fish would leave the shallow areas and go out and not really have a summer pattern because there wasn't a lot of habitat to relate to. they had a almost like an off season. I mean, you can still fish all summer, but you're just not going to typically hammer them like you do in the spring and the fall. Well, now they can't hide anywhere. And that's why, like I said, we do our annual surveys and base our regulations on that, and supplemental stockings and things like that. But as that stuff advances and there's more competition and it becomes more reasonably priced, it will definitely have an effect, especially on trophy fish, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you're exactly right. I know there's guys that are good enough with that they're targeting 2 pound plus crappie. And if it's not a 2 pounder, they're just going to go past it. So they're specifically keying in on these bigger fish. Ron said he used to catch a lot of spots out of Cedar. Any stocking of these planned?
As far as I know, there's never been one stock there, and I've been here since '95, and I've never seen one in Cedar.
Yeah, they must have came out of the creeks somewhere.
Well, I've heard of people bringing smallmouth from wherever and putting them in Cedar. Now, we've never seen any. I don't know if people are actually doing it, because people ask, why don't we put smallmouth in Cedar? That bass fishery is so awesome. I'm not going to do anything to try to mess it up. I mean, you can only have so many predators in a lake. And if they didn't work at Kincaid, they're not going to work with Cedar, because there's even more bass per acre in Cedar than there is in Kincaid.
Yeah.
And so it's just, why are you going to stock a fish that's smaller and, in a lake full of largemouth? Now, if the largemouth couldn't survive and only spots could, I'd be 100% for it. But when you got largemouth doing as well as they're doing in Cedar, like I said, we have too many bass in Cedar. I'm not going to stock more of them.
And you got stripers in there too.
Yeah.
It's a good population of stripers.
You've seen a few of those.
Yeah, I've caught a few big ones. There's some really good sized stripers in there. Alex P says, what lake would you suggest to catch white bass at?
I see a good number of those over at Rend, both in the lake and at the tail race. The tail race is just when I'm fishing, but in Rend, it's when we're sampling. We'll see some nice fish. We see a few at Kincaid, but they tend to be more of an open water fish. Now, we'll catch them in the shallows in the spring when we're sampling, but they're more of an open water fish, so we don't see quite as many of those in our surveys, but we see real healthy numbers of them at Rend. We'll see them over at Kincaid, and we see them in the rivers too. Some nice, we see them on the Big Muddy down at Rattlesnake Ferry and Oakwood Bottoms, and just depends on time of year and the forage.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, T. Harris says Carlisle is loaded with whites.
Yeah, that's in we're in what's called Region 5. The fisheries division is divided into 5 regions. I'm in Region 5, so I don't get to go up and help at Carlisle. So I can't really. I mean, that might be a world-class fishery. I just don't know that. But again, if you get on the ifishillinois.org webpage, there's write-ups on every single lake there. So the biologist for Carlisle Lake would write up, rate whether it's a good fishery or, for white bass or any type of fish like that.
How's the muskie doing at Kincaid?
Really well. The only disappointment is because of that summer thermocline. I just don't think you're going to get a giant fish out of there. We see mid 40, 47-inch females that are just the fattest, healthiest fish you can see, and you expect them in 4 or 5 years to be, 50 inches or something, and we just don't see it. And I just think that once they get to a certain age, they can tolerate they just can't tolerate those hot summer temperatures the bigger they get. And I just think that they just die of natural causes. And I think their body shape, the way they are, they sink instead of float. Because if we had 50-inch muskies dying out there on Memorial Day weekend when there's 3,000 people out there, somebody's going to take a picture and post it or let us know or tell law enforcement or somebody, and we just don't hear of that. And I've netted one legit 50-inch fish there in my career, and then I checked one. Chad Kane was a muskie guide for years, and he caught one that was 49 inches that I went and weighed and measured, and we turned loose. And like I said, we see 44, 45-inch fish that are just beautiful, fat and healthy, but I just don't think they're living past about 10 or 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what do they have to be 48 inches over before you can keep them?
Yes, and no males are going to get anywhere near that. So the only thing that would ever be legal over there is going to be a female. And for the most part, even most of the diehard muskie fishermen are basically going to want to certify that fish and turn it back loose again.
Right.
And so we have like a scale, and we can try to, depends when they catch it, but we can try to get over there and weigh it, measure it, and turn it back loose, whether it's a record or not.
What do you think a 48-inch muskie would weigh typically over there?
It weighs, low 20s. It depends if it has eggs or not. That's a big thing if it has the eggs. But the 45-inch fish are like in the low to mid 20s.
Okay.
And I think the record's about 31 or 32. And I can't remember if that was a 51 or a 52-inch fish. Now, I think they have gotten one or two in a lake over in East Central, Evergreen, I think is where they've netted it in a survey, but no one's ever caught it.
That's just a lot of fish with a lot of teeth I don't want to mess with.
Yeah, I caught really good one. I think it was New Year's Day at Kincaid. I was bass fishing on a jerkbait, and I caught one. I made a video of it, and I wasn't prepared to catch anything that big, and I was by myself, so I don't really know how long it was. I initially thought it was around that 48-inch class, but I don't know how much it weighed. It wasn't real fat. It was kind of it wasn't sickly by any means, but it wasn't real bloated or anything, but just a really healthy fish. It had good coloring to it, and it swam off after, I fought it for, I think it took me 13 minutes to get it in. I caught it on 8-pound or 10-pound test and a real light jerkbait rod. And I have no idea how it didn't break me off because my jerkbait was down inside of its mouth and my line was hanging out. And as many runs as it made, I just can't believe that 10-pound test didn't get sliced off, because a lot of times it's just a 50-50 shot. You set, a lot of times on that hook sets, when you break them off, you set that hook and it's just pink, nothing there. And I fought that fish, but it was a beautiful fish.
We do have muskies in 3 of the lakes at Pyramid, including Super Lake, which I had mentioned earlier. I mean, it's got some depths on it, 80 foot or more. Now it still stratifies in the summer, but it maybe not as shallow as what Kincaid does. And there's hopes that maybe we'll get some really big fish out of one of those lakes up there. But those lakes are kind of in their infancy. They've only been stocked since about 2006. And but I mean, we sample those every year. They're just real hard to sample because when we're setting muskie nets, we need to have about 4 foot of water, 50, 75 feet off the bank. And in those strip cuts, you just don't see that, except at Super Lake. There's some sets where we can catch decent amounts of muskie, and the populations aren't as dense up there. So we can set, 6 nets up there and maybe only catch 2 fish. Whereas at Kincaid, we might catch 60 in nets set in shallow water. But that's going to keep, hopefully keep growing, and maybe we'll see some really monster fish come out of Pyramid sometime.
Yeah, Connor had a question about what's the bass population like in the lower Big Muddy and the Mississippi?
I don't there's actually a Mississippi River biologist, and I don't get to get out on the Mississippi. I get out a little bit on the Big Muddy. We just don't see a lot, just because there's not a lot of habitat. When we're sampling, you just don't see a lot of bass in there. Now, that doesn't mean they're not in there, but if I was bass fishing, I would not go to the river based on what I've seen out of the lakes.
Gotcha. And TRS want to know if we've had any Asian carp impacted on any of the lakes in the region.
We haven't. We've had 1 or 2 collected in Carlisle and 1 or 2 collected in Rend, and that's it. We're fortunate that we're not like some of the Kentucky lakes, which are what we call river reservoirs. If you think of the drop off at Carlisle and at Rend, it's going to take a lot for a fish to get up over that spillway notch, even when it's ripping. One of the regs we have at Rend is you're not allowed to collect bait within, I think it's 1,000 yards of the dam. And the problem is those little Asian carp look very, very similar to a gizzard shad.
Mm-hmm.
And we're scared to death of people netting fish in that spillway and taking them up to the lake and them getting loose, because once they're loose, there's nothing we can do. But to this point, knock on wood, we haven't had any problems in our lakes. The only place we see a lot of them are like Horseshoe Lake down in Alexander County. It's bad there, but they're more of lakes that flood all the time. And that's why they have such problems in Kentucky, is those you open the locks and the fish just swim right up into the lake, and there's just not a whole lot you can do about it. But we're blessed that we don't have that situation. And the regs that we have on bait collection, you're not allowed to haul fish anywhere in the state of Illinois. You're not allowed to leave the lake with a live well full of water. One, because of diseases, and two, we just don't want these. We don't want those. People used to go to the river and get shad and then go fish all over the place. We're just scared to death. They're going to be the ones that are going to move these Asian carp just by accident. And so that's why we've set up wherever you collect the fish is where you have to use them for bait.
Gotcha.
Let's talk a little bit about spawning here before we wind this down, because it's that time of year, and we were also wanting to kind of touch on the shad kill that's happened on all these lakes. I was just down at Lake of the Ozarks, and there were huge gizzard shad floating around everywhere. And I know at Lake of Egypt, the same thing was happening. Every seagull within 100 miles was pinned up against that hot water discharge right up against the power plant, just gorging on the shad that they had no warm water. They were all right there in that little like quarter of an acre area right there.
Right. Yeah.
So how does the shad kill affect the fish population? Not just the predator fish, but the bait fish. Is it something that they can actually die off in a large enough amounts that the predator fish are looking for, a bait source that they're depending on and it's gone? Or is it something that they're typically not going to die off in large enough numbers to affect the overall, health of the fishery? Or what have you found?
They've never died off in this area in any numbers enough to affect the fishery. And in fact, when we were putting Christmas trees in Rend on March 1, that was like a day after the ice off over there. We saw a few, but we've seen it a lot worse in other years where one thing, if there's pelicans around, there's a lot of gizzard shad dying. And it's more, it seems to be like if it goes from cold to very mild and then cold again, that really gets them. And we never really got mild. I mean, I know that was unseasonably cool for this area and the coldest I've ever been down here for that extended amount of time. But we just didn't see that many fish dying like we have in the past. And what happens is they're plankton feeder. The gizzard shad are our main forage base. They're what we call plankton eaters. They're eating phytoplankton and zooplankton, microscopic plants and animals. They swim around and filter feed that stuff out of the water column. Well, like everything else, there's a lot less of that in the winter. And if they don't have adequate fat reserves, they're not going to make it through the winter to the following spring. And when you get that late cold snap, that's what ends up killing some of them. But the ones that remain are hardy, and they're such prolific spawners that, you probably won't notice a difference in it. And typically the ones that you see are like 3 to 5 inches. There's size class, we'll get some that are 14 inches in lakes. And then the little ones usually do okay too, because they're just not using as much energy as that mid-size one seems to be the one that dies a lot. But we haven't, in any of our surveys, what we look at is body condition. We kind of have averages, historical averages with what a certain bass size should look like weight-wise, and then it's a relative condition. And if they're within 90% of that, they're healthy fish. So we, even in our spring surveys where you would think you would see that, we just don't see an effect on it in terms of wow, there must have been a shad kill at this lake because all the fish are skinny. I haven't seen that in my 26 years.
That's interesting. I know at Lake of the Ozarks, there were shad everywhere, and majority of the ones I saw were about 6 to 8 inches. They like 90% of them were that same exact size. So I guess that mid-range gizzard shad.
And some of it depends on the system. I worked on lakes in Alabama where the gizzard shad were locked up like 10 to 12-inch fish. And there were so many of them that big that they didn't get off good spawns. And they're too big for the bass to eat to thin out. So it kind of depends on the system. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the Lake of the Ozarks, what that forage base is like. But we're blessed with heavy predator numbers that we don't have any systems that are. The only one that really has a lot of big gizzard shad is DeCoin City Lake. And along those lines, there's actually a few lakes where we'll actually put rotenone in to try to kill the shad back to, in essence, make them spawn better the following year because there's just too many of them.
Yeah, I know Perry County Lake here. It's got some. I was even telling Gabe, it has got some monster shad in there.
Yeah,
but I think you're right. I mean, the bass aren't big enough to eat them is the problem.
Yeah, and nothing can eat them once they get that big, and that's the problem with the Asian carp. They get so big, nothing can eat them, and they grow really fast.
Yeah.
But that's, like I said, you never like to see a bunch of dead fish unless it's something you don't like carp or Asian carp or something. But we've just never seen an effect of losing a bunch of gizzard shad to like a winter snap like we had recently.
Yeah. Now, do you think stripers get big enough to start eating those bigger shad like that? Because I mean, I don't know if that's the reason they put them in there, but I know they've been putting stripers in there for the past probably 20 years, I'm guessing. And
you mean down at
big ones
at Cedar or
no? It's our local lake here in Perry County.
Yeah, there's a type of management called top down, where you'll put a big open water predator like that striper in there to knock those gizzard shad down, which are also more of an open water fish. So they can get big enough to eat those fish, and they'll school them, and you'll see that. But you got to have awful lot of stripers that are big to really make a big difference in that. Now, they're certainly not hurting anything, and you get a trophy fishery as a bonus to it.
Right. Yeah, it's been probably about 5 years ago. I know my son and I went fished out there, and like you said, they were schooling up. And we seen a school out there that I bet there must have been 250 of them things in there. They were all 3 to 5 pounds each.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're growing pretty good, but
I would see that a lot working in southern states. A lot of people they call it fish the birds. If you're out fishing and you see the birds start schooling over the water, you know that, and there'd just be a race to get to them, whether they be white bass, hybrid bass, or stripers. And I've heard of that on Cedar too, where people see those big stripers come up and start schooling some fish, and it doesn't last real long, especially if you got a bunch of boats flying at them. But it's something to watch. If you see a bunch of fish coming down and feeding on shad right on the top of the water, that's probably a school of predators at work.
Yeah. I got a couple questions about the spawn, and this is kind of funny. I did a live stream, and it's been several weeks ago, but my daughters jumped on there. I was just doing it by myself, and they had a trivia question, and their trivia question was, how many eggs does the average bass lay? And then how many survive? And the same for the crappie. So do you have any idea I know that's a tough one, but
I wouldn't have a clue off the top of my head what the average is.
A lot.
It's a lot. And a lot of it is, there's two types of reproductive systems. One is density dependent, and one is what we call density independent. And it depends on the system. But in a density dependent, it doesn't matter how many eggs are laid, only a certain amount of them are going to actually make it. And when we're talking spawning, we talk reproduction and we talk recruitment. And when we say reproduction, we mean the egg hatches and you have a live fish. Recruitment means it makes it into the fishery, like lives at least a year. So you can have real good reproduction and very poor recruitment. But it just kind of depends on the lake, on the habitat. You know, a bass, a 3-5 pound bass may have 10,000 eggs. But if they don't have weed beds or somewhere for that male to help protect those young fish, and you got a ton of yellow bass and white bass and crappie and bluegill, they're going to put a hurting on them. But if it's kind of, if you have a lot of bass, you're going to get better survival because it's numbers. It's kind of a numbers dump. If you have few bass, you're not going to have good survival because when the male chases 20 bluegill off to the left, 20 bluegill come in from the right and decimate the nest. If it's out of balance where there's not enough bass and too many egg eating type fish, or even fish that are going to eat those fingerling bass. So I would lose that trivia question for sure. But there's just too many variables to say for sure. And then of course with the crappie, being a spawner that gets into schools and beds, again, typically what you see with those and bluegill, the bigger fish get the best spots in the middle of the beds, and that's how they kind of have genetic superiority, because they're the biggest, most aggressive fish get the best spots in the beds, which is in the middle, and the smaller fish along the edges are more apt to have their little ones get eaten by prey and egg eating fish and that type of thing.
Huh, that's cool. I had no idea. That's new to me, and that makes total sense. That's like the bait fish that's in the middle of the school is the one that usually makes it out alive. I got a question for you about the color red. The color red is huge for bass fishermen in the spring. So I guess my question is, how do you know anything about how certain colors hold their color in water? What would you say some of the best colors that show up in water are? As it gets deeper, do some colors tend to hold their spectrum, or whatever, however you want to say it?
I can't really, I don't have an answer to that with respect to colors. I do know that the fish have a type of camouflage that we call counter shading, where if you think of most fish are white on the bottom and some type of dark on the top. So say if you're a prey fish and there's a predator under you, they're looking up into and seeing your white belly with the white above at the surface. And if they're over top of you looking down, it's dark, and you tend to blend in more than that. But with all the different colors that are out there, I think it's maybe more of a marketing thing, because as much as people fish and try stuff, if purple was the killer, you wouldn't see red, chartreuse, pink, speckled. I mean, all these different colors out there, and somebody figure out pretty quick what's the best color that's going to work in a situation, and dominate a tournament. They're not going to be able to keep it a secret that long.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
But it seems to me more like I don't want to say common sense, but I would just think in stained water, more fish are going to see a bright color. Now, whether they get tired of seeing that because everyone's using the same bait and you try something else and it works, it's hard to say. And then a lot of times, say you're out fishing for 3 hours and you're using purple and it doesn't work, and you switch to chartreuse and catch 3 fish. You just think that's the greatest thing ever. Well, it might have been those fish weren't feeding for the 3 hours you were using the dark one, but then for some reason they were feeding when you switched to chartreuse or something. Or if you have a favorite color and it's your go-to color, you're typically going to fish that lure or that color at the best times of day where you think you're going to catch fish. If your favorite color is chartreuse, you're not going to try a purple one when you first get to the lake. Maybe 3 casts, and then you're going to go right back, like a crutch to what your favorite color is or where you've had success in the past.
Yep. Great answer. I agree with that 100%. Your favorite color is your confidence bait. So you're going to keep that in your hand and you're going to fish it more properly. And you're going to believe that it's going to catch more fish, and therefore it is going to catch more fish because of all the things I just mentioned. So that's my opinion on it.
So you're saying I shouldn't put my bubblegum pink worm down?
No, you got keep throwing that pink worm. Todd Phelps wants to know, do you see a big number of crawfish in Cedar? And if you do, what kind of colors are you seeing?
We're just typically seeing your standard red crawfish, and we don't really see the crawfish themselves. What we'll see is the crawfish antenna sticking out of bass bellies when we're working up the fish. When you grab the fish and go to weigh it, you might see that antenna sticking out, and you look in there and like, oh, they just ate a shad or they just ate a crawdad. But I can't say that it's an abnormal number that have crawdads in them. We're more apt to see them with shad in their bellies, because when we're shocking the fish, those shad get stunned. And even if the bass isn't in the electrical field, they'll swim up into it to get that shad, and then they get whacked. But they eat the shad. And so when we get the fish, it has a shad sticking out of its gullet, that had just eaten a shad.
I think I need to borrow this boat for the next tournament. Just
follow them around.
just follow them around, get the selective fish.
You said they'll still bite right away, won't they? Or within a day or something? Or
we've had people catch fish behind us along a dam. I mean, it doesn't get every single fish. It's just 6 or 8 feet, and you always see us run along the shoreline for the most part because we have to trap the fish. Because again, we're standing up with nets and a generator and a motor running. We're not being quiet with a trolling motor or nothing, and they're not just going to sit there, unless there's a down tree or some structure like that, or they're protecting a nest, or they're in that shad. That's why you'll see us in the spring and the fall. You won't see us typically shocking in the summer because the fish are off the shoreline and we just can't catch them in open water in any kind of numbers. They just swim away from you.
Okay.
So it's not quite as it's fun and it's exciting, but when we turn the shocker on, the whole lake just doesn't start frothing over with 5 and 6 pounders. It's just it's just right at the front of the boat,
Yeah. How long do you think, in your opinion, it takes Cedar Lake to grow an 18-inch bass?
I would say 3 to 4 years. Well, no, I lied about that. Probably 8 to 10.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. When I first got here, we will occasionally take 5 fish and send them off for what we call contaminant analysis to make sure they're okay to eat. Check them for chloridane, mercury, anything that you would suspect might be bad. And so obviously when we do that, we have to sacrifice the fish. So I hate doing that to big fish, but if the limit, like at Kincaid, 16 inches, there's no use having 12 inches fish tested when people aren't really allowed to eat them anyway. So we do have to keep 5 over that 16-inch limit. And the first year we did it, there's a floating bony structure in them called an otolith that puts a ring on just like a tree each year. And you can get that otolith out and look at it under a microscope and guess that fish's age with some pretty good reliability in this part of the country. And when I first moved up here, we did a blind test where the senior biologist looked at the otoliths and then I looked at them. And when he said, "What do you got?" I said, I screwed them all up. They're all like 10 and 12 years old. And he said, "Yeah, that's what they are." And what it is like I said, it's Cedar and Kincaid. Those fish are real slow growing. And then when they hit 14 inches, they just take off. But it takes them a while to get that size. But when a fish is slow growing, they'll live longer. And that's why you'll see a lot of fish, say at Baldwin. That bass might be 18 inches in 2 or 3 years, but it's not going to live very long because it's almost like it's partying hard, living on the edge, and they burn themselves out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you'll get some really big fish that are really old up in the northern climates in Canada because they're just so slow growing, but they live a lot longer than what we'll see down here. So for Cedar and Kincaid, I would say 6 to 12 years. I know that's a big range, but in a farm pond, you might see that in like 3 or 4 years. But in a big multi-species lake like that, it's going to take a little bit longer in those lakes. Now, if it's a limited bass population, like say at Rend, where there's just not the density, that only may take 3 or 4 years to get to 18 inches because there's less competition and more food for them.
Yeah, well, that makes sense why those 18 inches are so hard to catch because they've had a lot of years to look at baits and listen to electronics pings and everything go by them. So
they've probably seen your boat 100 times.
I know they've seen my boat a couple times. Guys, if you got any more questions for Shawn, get them in here. We're coming up on an hour and a half, so he's been kind enough to stay on here for this long, and it's been a great stream. Learned a lot. I thought I learned a lot last time, and I learned just as much tonight.
Oh, actually, this is a really good question. I actually have a question about this too. So during the last harvest study, did you notice any parasites in the bass? And is there any issue eating small bass with those? Noticed a few with the
Devil's Kitchen.
Devil's Kitchen.
Now, the main parasites that we see, almost every bass may have them. It's just like dogs and cats get fleas. We get ticks when we go out and walk in the woods. The main ones you'll see are grubs, either white grubs or black grubs. In the fins, they just look like a speck of pepper. But then they will turn into a worm or a grub type thing. And you'll see that when you fillet the fish. If you just cook the fish like you normally would, it's extra protein. If you've eaten fish out somewhere, you've already eaten it. But most people that call, when that they see that, they say, I ain't eating those fish. I tell them it's fine. It's a natural thing. The life cycle of those parasites involves fish, snails, and birds that eat fish. So say you have a private pond, you may never have had parasites. If you get a weed infestation that brings snails, you bring fish from the river or something that has some snail eggs in it, you'll have that life cycle, because you're going to have herons and kingfishers wherever there's fish. The only way to break that cycle, say in a private pond, is you either got to get rid of the snails, the birds, or the fish. And so one way we do that is we suggest people stock red ear sunfish in a private pond, which in southern states they call them shell crackers because they eat the snails. It's much less prevalent when you have red ear sunfish in a pond. In a big lake like that, there's nothing you can do. Once they're there, they're there. It's rare that they're not going to kill a fish, but I know it's unsightly when you go to clean it and there's a worm in there and you think it's polluted or something. It's just a naturally occurring parasite that won't hurt you if you just eat the fish like you would if you cook the fish like you normally would cook the fish.
Yeah, I know when I bought my place here, it's been 10 years ago, we had that. I mean, it was in every single fish we had was that yellow and that black rub. And I had talked to one of the guys over here that works for the Missouri Conservation, and he had told me it was also from, I guess, an overabundance of small fish too. Too many bluegill. There wasn't enough, I guess, bass eating the bluegill. They were overpopulated and this and that. But he had also said, he had told me to get the red ear. And that's what we did for 2 years straight, to stock red ear in there. By that third year, we didn't see any fish anymore. I mean, I couldn't believe it went that fast, but.
Yeah, that's like I said, the snails are the easiest thing to get rid of to break that cycle. Last year I got a picture from some folks. There's another thing called anchor worm that gets on the outside of the fish, and you'll see them on the fish's mouth. And again, I think the fancy term's Lernia might be the genus of it. It looks very unsightly, but it doesn't mean the lake's polluted, the fish are bad or anything. It's just, it's just something people don't really like to see when they catch a fish, or especially when they're planning on eating. But I've never seen any of the parasites actually kill the fish or even get them to a state where they look sickly or, look unhealthy. And if they're feeding and biting your lure, that means they're in pretty good shape. When the sick are so sick from something, you're not going to catch them, because they're like you or I. They just don't want to eat, and they're just lackadaisical, and then they just die.
We caught a fish. Me and Jay caught a fish at Egypt, and actually caught one at Wapapello the other day. But it had this green, kind of a thicker worm-looking thing. I want to say it's a lamprey that was attached to the fish. Is that what that was? Maybe like 4 to 6 inches long.
We do have lamprey in Illinois. I haven't seen a whole lot of them, but I have seen marks on fish where they've come off. But there's like a Leesbrook lamprey, and I can't think of the other names, but they're pretty rare in terms of seeing them. But there again, it's just like anything else that they probably hurt the growth a little bit on a fish, especially if they're covered in it. But typically you're not going to see but 1 or 2, and then they fall off and do their thing in terms of their life cycle. But we've never really seen a problem with them. Now they have had problems in the Great Lakes with some of that kind of thing, but that's been on salmon fisheries and not something that we really have down here.
Yeah. It's definitely a kind of an interesting question there. So when a fish eats a snake, what keeps us, humans from getting affected by the venom?
I would just say that if a fish eats a venomous snake and it's not going to die from the venom of the snake, it's not going to ingest it in the meat. And I don't know how often that's really gonna. Now I have cut open bass that have had turtles and garter snakes and that type of thing in them, but I just don't know how many venomous snakes are getting eaten by fish. And by the time you catch it, I would think that's completely out of its system. And again, when they're eating that venom, it kills us by getting in our bloodstream. And when a fish is eating something like that, it's not really getting into its bloodstreams, and it's not going to be in the muscle tissue, which is what you're going to be eating when you eat the fish.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. Well, let's leave you with one more question here. What is your favorite on the job story? Does anything jump out at you?
I had a phone call one time from a lady at Kincaid. She saw a giant anaconda that was every color of the rainbow. Her husband, the fishing was so good because she thought the fish wanted to get out of the water to get away from the snake, that her husband wouldn't put his pole down to get a picture of it. And then it went into the side of the water like it was going into its lair. And I said, did anyone else happen to see the snake? And she said there was 2 gentlemen on a houseboat not far from us, but she didn't want to speculate as to what they were up to. And I saved that message for about 8 years. And anytime I had a bad day, I would listen to it and I just laugh. And then I hit it a race one day by accident. And and we actually, because we got a call on it and we're close to SIU, and you never know what kind of pets those kids have that get too big and they don't. I called law enforcement and I said, we've got a report of a giant anaconda. And it was summertime. Like I said, you never say never. So they actually went out and looked around in the area. I think it was near the Buttermilk Beach area or something. So there's been some neat phone calls with respect to that type of thing. But it's just mainly just getting out and seeing the number of fish, the size of fish, the fish populations and lakes and nature stuff that we're blessed to have. And that's the stuff I enjoy. And the fact that I'm doing a job that other people want to take a day off from their job to help me do my job for free. So I love being on the water. Last spring when I wasn't allowed to go out, that was rough. That was rough. So it was fun to be back out in the fall, and I'm looking forward. Like I said, we're going to start muskie surveys in about 2 weeks. I'll be out Friday sinking stuff, and I'm just anxious to get back out on the water.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one of these times, like I said earlier, maybe Gabe or I'll see you out on the boat ramp or out on the lake or something, get to shake your hand at least,
Well, we're not allowed to do that right now.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll have to air a fist bump or something. I'd get in huge trouble if I shook somebody's hand right now and somebody saw it.
I think Greg told me a story about an anaconda he saw over there at Kincaid years ago. It's probably the same snake.
Well, then it was my wife that called in.
We had somebody come up from the Gulf and drop. It's called a dogfish, a spiny dogfish. It looks like a little shark, and they dropped it on the boat ramp at the down at the Ohio River. And unfortunately, my phone number was the easiest one to find for whoever found the thing. And so there was all this speculation, of was it because bull sharks have not been known, I guess, to be up in the St. Louis area. So, but luckily, by the time I got down to look at it, somebody had figured out that it was this. It's called a Squalus acanthus. I think it's the thing I dissected when I was at Penn State in a fish anatomy class, and they were just being ornery and brought it up and dumped it just to cause an uproar. But they had gotten a hold of, I think, a Kentucky law enforcement officer, and he went on and on about it was a bull shark, and and it wasn't. But I'm glad they got a hold of him before they got a hold of me, and I wasn't the one that said what it was when that's not what it actually was. But we get to hear and see a lot of strange things, and we get accused of an awful lot of stuff with panther stockings and coyotes coming out of helicopters and all kinds of neat stuff like that. But it's never a dull moment. And then, one time I was helping the herpetologist do some snake surveys, and it was around the Kincaid area, and somebody saw we were in my shock boat. So they came up to us and they're like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And I said, and we didn't really want to advertise what we were doing because we didn't want anyone messing with the snakes. And we said, "Well, we're looking for turtles." And they were like, "Well, you better be careful. There's rattlesnakes around here." And me and that guy looked at each other and we were like, "There's rattlesnakes around here?" And they were like, "Yeah." And they went away. And I would have loved to heard their conversation about the DNR guys that didn't know there was rattlesnakes around anywhere, which is what we were there looking for. We just didn't want to tell them that because we were afraid of what they would have done. But I would have loved to heard their conversation the rest of the day on that boat about the dumb DNR guy.
Yeah. Those suckers swim too. I've seen them swimming.
They float really high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Well, good deal. Well, man, we appreciate you coming on here. It's nice
Yeah.
to talk with you. And Greg's got his connections.
All of your information down below, so they can get a hold of you. You got your email down there and your number you left. So, if anybody has any questions or anything,
and we really appreciate all the work you do out there.
I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me come on. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, need the Fisher Tractor maps or anything, let me know. If your question's not about one of my lakes, I'll get you in touch with the biologist that can answer your question.
Awesome.
All right,
Shawn. We'll have a good evening, and we'll see you down the road.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah,
good stuff. Let's soak it in. You know, the last time he was on here, I went back and watched that show 2 or 3 times, I think.
Yeah, there was so much information. And I mean, I know we were here face to face and listened to all of it, but your brain can't even comprehend everything that you went over in that amount of time.
Just good stream to watch back a couple times and get some, I don't know, soak it all in.
I love the simple fact that he's so intelligent enough to answer just about every question on here. You know, except for the ones he doesn't know about, but he's not afraid to throw it out there. Hey, I don't know. You know, doesn't lead you astray. So
I had no idea, and this is probably something that everybody knows but me, but how he said that the alpha crappie or whatever will build its nest in the middle and the other ones around the outside of it. That's pretty smart.
You need to come up here when my crappie start spawning, because right down here, when I shot that video last year underwater, you can see and just watch them, and that's exactly how they act in there. It's crazy. But the weird thing is like in my pond, when you get all the bluegill around, you'll see all the bluegill and they'll be all surrounded, but there'll be just one section that's just crappie, and they will not let them bluegill come anywhere near that thing. They're aggressive when they do it.
Interesting. Segregated, kind of.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to talk about a bait that is going to come into play right now. We've had a lot of rain the last couple of days, and the water, you know, like Greg was saying, Kincaid is just chocolate milk, and it's not gotten any better. Cedar. That's the same one I've been throwing. Yeah, and Cedar, I haven't been over there, but I'm sure. Yeah, that one right there. I'm sure it's pretty stained. So something that you definitely want in the boat or on the bank if you're pond fishing, any stained water, you know, and when I say stained water, I mean 2 foot of visibility or less, is a spinnerbait, and in particular, a thunder thumper. You know, I got that name from Morris and Sons. That was,
I seen he was on here a while ago.
Yeah. So
sleep at the reel. Hey, how's it going, man? Chris, I haven't talked to you in a while. I need to get a hold of you sometime.
Yeah, we just had fisheries biologist on here, and we did do a little bit of crappie.
And he would have been interested.
Yeah, if you guys like crappie fishing, asleep at the reel, go check out his channel. He does a really good job. But this right here, this is happens to be a Cumberland Pro. It is called what's the name of it? Somniac.
Yeah. It's
their Somniac. So it's a short arm spinnerbait. Puts out a ton of thump in that off colored water. And this is the fish are shallow. I mean, they're up there shallow right now. So it's just a matter of covering water. The temps are 50 to 52-ish in a lot of these lakes. I know I talked to my buddy John on the way up here, Jonathan, and he was at Murfreesboro.
50s?
Yeah, he was at Murfreesboro. Man, I was Sunday. Just there. It was 50 to 52.
What was that the Sunday before when I was there? I was at 40.
At Kincaid?
At Kincaid, yeah.
Okay.
So it's come up a bunch, which I figured the rain would have.
Well,
you know.
This was at Murfreesboro. Lake
smaller.
of the Ozarks we saw 54, you know, but a lot of the lake was 56 or 46. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But on those warm afternoons when the sun's out, it can very easily get up in the 50s. And even if it's not quite in the 50s, if it's mid 40s, the spinnerbait is something that is really going to put some fish in your boat right now. You know, these pre-spawners are starting to move up. They're going to be getting in the grass. They're going to be getting around wood. And this is a bait that you definitely want to have and want to be throwing it around.
Yep.
And
one other thing, keep in mind too, this is not like Gabe was saying, we got a lot of rain coming in, stuff's getting muddied up. Don't go with your double willows right now. Stay with, like he said, with that big thumper blade. They'll pick it up big time, even that really dirty water. One of my favorite ones to throw is, I know he's got a white and chartreuse and a white one here. I can tell you muddy water, my favorite one is just a plain black.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably my favorite one with a thumper blade.
I need to throw that because Ron it said the same thing. He likes a black,
Yep.
or he likes a white and chartreuse, or a straight white.
Yep.
And I don't throw that black at all.
Yeah,
I do at
black
night.
is-
I've thrown it at night.
Yeah, I just like it in that real muddy water. I know we just talked about color a while ago, but I think they pick up on it a little bit better because it's such a dense color there that they see it easy. With
It has a
this,
silhouette kind
yeah,
of.
this is kind of a going back and forth with the whites and the white and chartreuse.
Right.
But I mean, they get bit, that's for sure.
But either one of these, like, let me see
Yeah.
this one here real quick. So there's a couple different ways to do this. And this is something I typically do. This is a Berkeley grass pig. It's about a 5-inch swim bait, and I've cut it down. But I like to run a swim bait on my spinnerbait this time of year. Now in the summer and stuff, or in clear water, I don't put anything on there other than maybe a treble hook unless I'm fishing around grass. But this time of year, I like something that has a really big profile like this. This is a size 7 Colorado blade, and that swim bait is going to create a lot of lift. Not only does it create a big profile from the side, gives that fish something to key in on, and it stands out in that darker water, but it also creates lift, and it allows you to slow this bait down and really creep it around that hard cover, that grass line. This is a 1/2 ounce. This is the lightest that I'll go. I'll go all the way up to a 1 ounce if I'm wanting to fish a little bit deeper, or if I go up to just a little bit bigger blade, that 1 ounce can handle that. But about a 1/2 ounce with really 3/4 with a 7 is probably better. You can't reel this very fast, but that's okay. It actually makes you slow down. If you reel this thing too fast, it'll actually roll over because it's got that size 7 blade on there. But when you guys go out, spinnerbait, that's something you want to keep in your boat. Yeah. So that's all I got on that. We got any last minute questions to clean up here?
David said black and purple.
Black and purple.
He's a big black and purple guy.
Tom says he's seeing water temps up here between 52 to 57.
So worldwide fishing tour, not one of the world's dirty. What's the video dropping from Lake of the Ozarks?
Well, see, I put 2 videos out from the Toyota series this week, and actually I did one with Ron. He's got some pretty good spring fishing tips, and the one I dropped today. And then the BFL video will probably be next week. I got a really good Wapapello video. I got to jump in the boat with Doug Cheatham, and we fished the river part of Wapapello. We put in a Holiday Landing.
Oh yeah.
And I would not run that at all.
No, there's no way.
Dude, he knew exactly where he was going.
That channel is so narrow.
Yeah.
I mean, if you get I tell everybody this all the time, they think I'm joking, but I mean, sometimes that channel is like 12 foot. And that's it. I mean, if you're in a bass boat, I mean, you have no room to go.
Well, not only that, there's areas where it looks like you could go 3 ways because there's little islands or just a little ditch or something, and there's only one way to go. There's only one way where it's deeper than 1 foot.
Yeah.
And he knew the right way.
Yeah, I do not care.
I would not
for going there.
Yeah, but we had fun. We caught him. I was working on that video before I came up here, so that'll hopefully I can get that done Wednesday. And then I've got me and Mike went out after the Toyota series the next day and caught him real good on a jig, shallow. Had a really fun time.
I bet he was happy to see that.
Yeah, we were just disappointed that we didn't catch him in the tournament.
Yeah,
we had several nice keepers.
What happens when you quit taking it serious and just have fun?
I know that's so true.
That's my whole plan this year, tournament fishing. I even told my partner that's we're gonna go out and have fun. Don't take it so serious and see what we can do. So
Stephanie says she's already tied. It's already tied on the rod for the weekend. White and chartreuse. Let me know how you do. I think it's going to work for you.
I would say if you're getting rain or have any water running in anywhere, that's where I'd be going. Mm-hmm. I know Kincaid. There's a couple spots over there. I was actually telling Aaron about 1 or 2 of them actually that are just phenomenal when you get that water running in there. You can just stack them up in there.
That's a great comment. Asleep at the reel. He said, "Is it amazing how well fish see in dirty water? I have seen them on live scope come from 5 feet away in water that I cannot see my jig in more than 6 inches." Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of when we had Menendez on here. His theory is for every foot that a human can see, he believes that a fish can see 5 feet further. So if we're seeing 1 foot in the water, he thinks a fish can see 5 feet. So 5 feet to the left, to the right, to the up, to the down, that whole spear. So that, and not only that, they can feel anything. I mean, you think about how little vibration just a swim bait puts off. I mean, it puts off some with that paddle tail, but it's not a thump like a rattle trap or a spinner bait or something. And they can pick up on that. They know that's what they do for a living. They're very in tune with their environment. If something swims by them within a couple feet, even if it's like 6 inch visibility, they feel it with their lateral line.
Yeah.
And then they'll go find it.
Yeah. Alex B said he bought a big punching stick. He said he's going to comment a lot. He's going to learn a lot this year. So, dude, just ask anytime you want. Trust me. I think as far as punching goes, I think both of us can probably help.
Yeah, sure, man. Sure. I've got several videos. If you go back and look at my archives, there's some Kincaid Lake videos and some of the Cedar Lake videos in the fall. There'll be some punching videos in there. And there's one video where I'm on Kincaid and I sit down and break down my punching setup and stuff really well. But that's something me and Greg love to do. So yeah, anytime you got any questions, it's fun, dude. When you get on a good punching bite, it is fun. And
then one thing you want to learn there too is pegging your weight. You've got to peg weight when you're going to punch them like
2 bobber stops.
Yep.
2 bobber stops to get it done. 50-pound braid. Just depends on how thick the mats are. 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces.
And just to throw that out there, I know we talked about this last year. I started buying the 6 cents bobber stops. They last a whole lot longer than those.
They're bigger,
Bass
aren't they?
Pro.
A little bit bigger.
They're a little bit bigger. They're I don't know if they come in different colors. I just ordered all black ones, just for whatever reason. But they seem to hold up a lot longer because a lot of them cheaper bobber stops, you'll set a hook a couple times or throwing in and out, and they really start burning up your line, or not necessarily the line. They burn up themselves really going up and down braid, and then you'll see it'll start slipping constantly. But the 6 cents ones, I've had a lot better luck with. So
yeah, because that's why that happens a lot with the smaller ones. You'll see the side of it'll start blowing out from the braid. And you basically got like half a bobber stop on there.
Yep. So
Barry said he was fishing a farm pond today, water full of fry.
Next to the bank. It was good. Oh yeah, that's my pond's the exact same way. You go down there and
there's fry in it.
Do what?
There's fry, like little baby fry already.
Well, I think it's minnows what they are. But you can just walk down there and they are all the way up. They're almost in my yard because the water's up, but they're in that grass. Just all through there, and you can watch them run through there.
Those couple of really warm days that we had where the sun was shining, those water temps in the pond went up like 15 degrees. Yeah, I mean, I was catching them fish right on the bank, and
that bass I caught today was only 2 foot off the bank.
Yeah, and he was aggressive too, wasn't he?
Oh yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It was fat too. The picture doesn't do it any justice, but that fish has been eating healthy for about a week or so.
It's time, and that was another question I had for Shawn, and we didn't get to it, but I was going to ask him about the water temp versus the length of day, which plays a bigger role in the bass spawning. And
I think who was it? Was it Ron that said it the other night?
Might have been, yeah.
That was talking about the photo period there. That I think he's exactly right. I think that puts them in position, but until that water temperature comes up, I don't think they start really eating.
That makes sense.
I strongly.
Or they don't actually pull up to the.
I think like he said, I think that it sends them on their way. They get to their positions, but they don't quite go full effect. They don't commit to it. They don't start eating like that until that water temperature, because and I know we've had this conversation about them being lethargic and everything with the cold water, but I mean, they still eat. But I think once you get to that water temperature, just a little bit, a few degrees, I think it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
That's what really turns them on. So
they're outside of their spawning areas and they're just waiting.
They're just waiting. Yeah. They're like you said, that you get those nice, hot, sunny days. It really warms that shallower water up. And all of a sudden you start seeing the bigger ones start coming up there and really eating a bunch, really.
And it happens quick. Yep. When that water hits the whatever temperature they want, overnight, boom, they're up there.
Because you think about it, what's the first thing you see when the water starts warming up? What's at the top of the water? Your bluegill, your smaller crappie, stuff like that. They're all at the top of the water. So them fish are just waiting. When they start seeing them to start dispersing out at the top of the water, they're easy prey then.
Yeah. And I've heard they're warming their eggs up too. Like they're actually, not only are they warming themselves up, but they're actually warming, that heat's transferring into their body. They're getting everything prepped. So it happens quick, you know.
Yep, that's for sure. So,
all right, guys.
See everybody back here next Monday, I guess.
Yeah, we got a guest. We got a Chad Morgan Taylor is going to be our guest. He is
I thought you said it was Kevin Van Dam.
No,
Oh.
we're working on that. We're just baby steps. We're getting there though. We're starting to get some. We've had some really good guests on here this year. But yeah, Chad Morgan Taylor, look him up. He is a Bassmaster Elite Touring Pro. He's down at Pickwick right now practicing.
Good.
And he's going to jump on the stream next
I've
Monday.
got a lot of questions.
He's a Table Rock guy. He's a guy down Table Rock. When I called him on the way to Lake of the Ozarks, he just got off Table Rock, and they've been catching them pretty good down there. So jump on here next week, same time, same place. Bring some questions for Chad, and he's a great guy, and we'll have fun. So appreciate you guys staying on here, and until next time. Until next week.
See you Monday.
All right.